ID. Let me see it.
Am I being detained? What's the reason you need my ID?
Don't do that. Just hand it over.
What is the legal reason you need it?
We got a call. You match your description.
What description? What crime was reported?
Step away from the vehicle.
A Waukegan officer tried to turn the CVS parking lot on Route 41 into a street checkpoint. He demanded a black man's ID like it was mandatory. And the second the man asked basic questions, the officer treated it like defiance. What the officer didn't know was that the man standing by his car was a Marine veteran who stayed calm under pressure and knew exactly what his rights were. And the bigger problem for the officer was simple. Everything was being recorded, from the body camera to the CVS cameras to the phones that came up the moment his tone changed. At this moment, we want to tell you we're grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Quick thing, tell us where you're watching from, state or country. And if you like stories where calm, documentation, and accountability beat ego and abuse of power, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now back to what happened. The officer stood close enough to control the space. He repeated the ID demand, fast and sharp, like he wanted a yes or no outcome, not a conversation. The man, Andre Ellis, stayed steady beside his car. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step toward the officer. He kept his hands visible and asked the only questions that mattered, whether he was being detained and what the legal reason was. That was the point where the officer decided Andre wasn't being cooperative, even though Andre wasn't refusing to help. Andre was refusing to be bullied. The officer shifted his wording. He started describing Andre's questions as arguing. He started stacking commands. He ordered Andre to move away from the vehicle, even though Andre wasn't doing anything with the vehicle. He warned Andre about consequences without explaining the actual basis for the stop. His hand hovered near his cuffs, like he wanted the moment to look dangerous on camera. Andre didn't give him that. Andre had just come out of CVS with a small bag and a receipt. His keys were in his hand. The car was right there. Nothing about the scene matched the officer's urgency. The officer claimed there had been a call and that Andre matched a description. He didn't give details that would make it believable. No clear description. No location direction. No specific crime. Just a vague justification that gets used when someone wants an excuse to stop somebody. And this part mattered because this wasn't a random location. Along Route 41, the same commercial lots kept showing up in complaint stories from black residents. People talked about being questioned for standing near their own cars, waiting for rides, picking up prescriptions, or just existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. A local advocate had been collecting names and dates because a pattern only gets taken seriously when it's documented. Andre knew about that reputation. He wasn't trying to perform for anyone. He was trying to stay safe and keep the situation clean because he understood how quickly an officer could twist body language into a narrative. As the officer got louder, people started paying attention. A couple walking in slowed down. A man near the edge of the lot turned towards the sound. Near the entrance, the assistant manager, Tanya Patel, watched because she could tell this wasn't a quick question and go. She wasn't interfering. She was tracking what was happening and where the cameras were pointed because she knew how often stores get pulled into these situations after the fact. Phones started going up, one, then two, then more. The officer noticed. Instead of calming down, he got more controlling. He leaned into the authority tone. He framed Andre as suspicious because Andre didn't instantly hand over identification on demand. He implied that a person with nothing to hide would never ask questions. Andre stayed focused. He kept his hands visible. He didn't reach into pockets. He didn't step closer. He repeated that he was willing to cooperate once the officer explained the reason for the stop. That's the power chess game right there. Some officers don't want compliance. They want submission. They want a person to accept being treated like a suspect with no cause. Because once that becomes normal, it keeps happening to the next person. Then the officer made a mistake that cameras love. He started talking like this was routine at that CVS lot, like he regularly checked certain people there. He didn't say it as a specific response to a specific call. He said it like a habit, like a pattern. Andre clocked it immediately and pointed out calmly that The officer was describing a routine practice, not a real reason tied to Andre in that moment. The officer felt the controls slipping, so he moved closer and threatened detention if Andre didn't comply. He shifted his stance like he was preparing to grab Andre, even though Andre still hadn't done anything that justified hands-on force. Tanya watched Andre's hands, still visible. She watched the officer's hands, ready. And the body camera kept capturing every choice, every escalation, every line that showed what this was really about. Then the radio crackled. Dispatch came back with information that didn't line up with the officer's claim. Andre didn't celebrate, he didn't taunt, he just stayed steady because he understood something important. When an officer gets caught in a lie in real time, the next move is usually damage control, not honesty. The radio update cut straight through the officer's story. Dispatch came back with details that didn't match what he had implied. And in that one moment, the situation changed from a street-side power play into a documented problem. Andre stayed still and kept his hands visible. He didn't try to win the moment. He let the facts do the work. The officer didn't back off. He doubled down. He started talking faster and louder, trying to rebuild authority with pressure instead of reason. He repeated the ID demand again and framed Andre's calm questions as refusal. He shifted his feet to block Andre's path, not because Andre was trying to leave aggressively, but because the officer wanted control of movement on camera. Andre didn't get pulled into it. He kept the same tone and asked for the legal basis, and then asked for a supervisor. He also asked for the officer's name and badge number, because he knew how quickly reports get written to match an officer's emotions. That supervisor request is where the officer's ego spiked. He warned Andre about being detained for not cooperating, even though Andre had been cooperating in the only way that keeps people safe in these situations. Calm, visible hands, clear questions, and no sudden movements. The officer moved one step closer and made it clear he was considering cuffs. Phones were already up. The crowd wasn't huge, but it was enough. And the CVS entrance was right there, with Tanya watching and tracking the time because she understood something most witnesses understand now. Footage without a timestamp and a location becomes easy to dismiss later. The officer called for another unit. While they waited, he tried the usual tricks. He implied Andre was hiding something. He hinted at searching the car. He talked like Andre's refusal to hand over ID instantly meant Andre had done something wrong. Andre didn't argue every sentence. He didn't debate. He repeated the same points. No threats, no crime, no reason given, and he wanted a supervisor present before anything went further. Then the officer let the mask slip again, not with a dramatic outburst, but with a casual comment that sounded like routine bias. He talked about how he had to deal with people like Andre at that exact lot all the time, as if the location itself justified treating black customers as suspects. Andre clocked it. He pointed out that the officer was describing a habit, not a specific reason. That's when the officer tried to flip the narrative, and he stepped to Andre's side like he was about to take control, and he described Andre's steady posture as aggressive body language. The body camera captured that moment, too, the gap between what the officer claimed and what Andre was actually doing. A second squad car pulled in. Sergeant Dana Kruger got out and walked up with that look supervisors have when they already know the vibe is wrong. She asked what the stop was for. The officer tried to summarize it in vague terms, leaning hard on the idea of a call and suspicious behavior. Kruger asked for specifics. The officer didn't have them. Kruger looked at Andre. Andre kept it simple and factual. He explained he had come out of CVS, had his receipt, had been standing by his car, and had asked for the reason for the stop. He also told her calmly that he was a Marine veteran and he understood his rights, and he had not consented to any search or detention without a lawful reason. Kruger checked with dispatch herself. The gap got wider. The officer tried one last move. He suggested Andre should just hand over ID to make it easy. Kruger didn't play along. She asked the officer directly what crime he suspected and what legal standard he was relying on. There was no clean answer, because there wasn't one. Now the officer had a problem: back down in front of witnesses, or keep escalating and create something he could justify later. The fact that a supervisor was there made the second option riskier. He pivoted to saving face. He started talking about giving Andre a warning or telling him to leave or not come back to the lot. He tried to turn a public business parking lot into a personal move-along order. Kruger shut that down too. She made it clear Andre was free to go and that there was no lawful basis to detain him. She directed the officer to disengage. Andre didn't taunt. He didn't do a victory lap. He did what disciplined people do in these moments. He ended it clean. He walked to his driver's door, still slow, still visible hands. And before he got in, he told Kruger he wanted the incident number and the officer's identifying information for a formal complaint. He also made it clear, without raising his voice, that multiple recordings existed and his receipt timestamp matched everything. The officer stood there tight-faced, watching Andre leave like it wasn't over. But it was over in the parking lot. It wasn't over on paper. That night, Andre didn't post an emotional rant. He built a timeline. He saved the receipt. He wrote down the exact location, the time, the unit numbers he remembered, the supervisor's name, and what the officer had said about always checking people like him there. He also got the name of Tanya Patel from someone who pointed her out as the manager watching from the door. The next day, Andre made 2 calls. One was to the department's complaint line. The other was to Reverend Lionel Brooks, because Brooks had been collecting stories from black residents for months. Names, dates, arrest outcomes, and the same officer showing up again and again in the background of those stories. Brooks listened to Andre's timeline and did what he always did. He compared it against his records. Same location pattern. Same style of vague justification. Same escalation when someone asked basic questions. Same officer. Brooks also knew the difference between a single bad stop and a documented pattern. Patterns are what get outside agencies to move. Tanya, meanwhile, pulled the store footage and preserved it. She didn't hand it out like gossip. She saved it like evidence because she had seen enough over the years to know that the truth disappears when nobody protects it. Within a week, Andre's body camera request was in motion, and the community complaints list grew. People started coming forward quietly first, then louder, when they realized Andre wasn't the only one. Some talked about being stopped for matching a description that never existed. Others talked about arrests that got tossed out later with no apology. And then one clip hit the public. Not because Andre was chasing viral attention, but because once enough people filed complaints, a local reporter started asking questions. And someone realized the body camera didn't make the officer look justified. It made him look reckless. The video showed the tone shift. It showed the officer treating questions like defiance. It showed the vague call story falling apart. And it showed how quickly the situation would have turned physical if Andre had panicked. Once the footage hit the public, Waukegan PD lost the ability to control the story with a press statement and a promise to review it. It wasn't just one clip. It was the pattern people recognized immediately. Same location, same vague justification, same tone shift when someone asked basic questions, and the same officer treating a normal question like a challenge to his authority. Andre stayed quiet publicly at first. He didn't do interviews chasing attention. He did documentation. He handed over his timeline, the receipt timestamp, and the names of witnesses who could confirm what happened before the cameras even became the main point. Reverend Lionel Brooks did what he had been building toward for months. He put Andre's incident next to other reports and showed how the same officer's stops followed the same blueprint. Lots of suspicious person language, lots of people matching descriptions that never got clarified, and too many black residents describing the same outcome: threats of detention, pressure for ID, and arrests that went nowhere later. That's when the federal involvement became real. Special Agent Miguel Ortega didn't show up with speeches. He showed up with requests. The Bodycam archive, dispatch logs, CAD entries, any records of a call that supposedly triggered the stop, prior arrest reports written by Officer Brett Halverson, complaints, supervisor notes, use of force reports, even the activation history of Halverson's camera, because patterns show up in what gets recorded and what conveniently doesn't. AUSA Naomi Lerner didn't need Andre to sound emotional. She needed consistency, and the evidence had it. The first problem was simple. The justification for stopping Andre didn't hold up when dispatch logs were pulled. The timing didn't match the story Halverson tried to build in the lot. The call narrative looked more like a cover than a reason. The second problem was worse. Halverson's history didn't look like normal policing. When the stop data was reviewed, his numbers stood out. Not because he was proactive in a balanced way, but because his stops of black residents were disproportionately high compared to other officers working the same shifts in the same areas. His reports used the same phrases over and over, and multiple incidents ended the same way: intense escalation, then charges dropped or cases dismissed later. Federal investigators also looked at prior arrests that community members had been talking about for a long time. The ones that ended with nothing but stress, legal bills, lost work hours, and a record that still created problems, even after charges were dropped. Several of those arrests came back to the same issue. The initial detention didn't have a clear lawful basis, and the report language looked designed to justify the detention after the fact. That's how a single parking lot encounter turns into a civil rights file, because it isn't treated as a one-off attitude problem. It's treated as a repeat practice. Tanya Patel's role mattered more than she expected. She preserved the CVS footage with timestamps and provided it through the proper channels. Her footage didn't just show the confrontation. It showed what happened right before it, including Andre's calm movements, how the officer approached, and how quickly the officer escalated without a clear reason. It helped eliminate the usual excuses that officers lean on later. Sergeant Dana Kruger got interviewed too. Supervisors always do. And this is where departments get uncomfortable, because pattern cases don't just ask what one officer did. They ask who saw it and what they did about it. Kruger didn't have the luxury of pretending she never noticed Halverson's style. Investigators asked about prior complaints and how they were handled. They asked whether Halverson had been counseled, whether discipline was recommended, and whether anything changed. Inside the department, Internal Affairs opened a formal case. That process moved fast, not because departments are always eager, but because federal eyes change the incentives. The body cam footage, dispatch contradictions, and witness recordings made it hard to stall. Halverson's response followed the usual path. He claimed he felt threatened. He claimed Andre's questions were non-compliance. He claimed he was acting on a call. But when investigators asked for details that could be verified, the story didn't stay stable. And that's what ended him. The department terminated Halverson. Not with a quiet transfer, not with paid leave, until the public moved on. Terminated. But the bigger accountability didn't stop at the job. The federal review didn't treat the footage as an embarrassing moment. It treated it as evidence of discriminatory policing. Andre's case became a reference point for reviewing Halverson's prior stops and arrests. And that review had real outcomes. Some residents received formal letters acknowledging improper actions tied to Halverson's reports. Several cases were re-examined for civil rights violations. In at least a few situations, the city moved towards settlements, rather than risk litigation that would put years of stop patterns and internal handling under a microscope. Andre didn't get rich. That's not how this usually works. What he got was something more important to him: public confirmation that he wasn't the problem, and proof that staying calm and documented made it impossible to rewrite what happened. He also became a quiet bridge for other residents. Not as a hero, not as a professional activist, but as someone who knew how to organize facts and keep people focused on evidence, not emotion. He helped people request footage, log dates, and file complaints the right way. Waukegan PD had to change procedures too, because the department couldn't act like this was only about one officer's attitude. They tightened ID demand rules in practice, not just on paper. They enforced Bodycam activation with real discipline. Supervisors were required to respond faster to escalating street encounters. Stop data reporting became more transparent. Officers received updated training on lawful detentions and how quickly biased assumptions turn into unlawful actions. And the CVS lot on Route 41 became something it should have been the whole time, a place where people could pick up prescriptions and go home without being treated like suspects. In the end, the lesson wasn't complicated. Andre won because he didn't panic, didn't perform, and didn't give the officer an excuse. He stayed calm, stayed factual, and let cameras and records do what they do best: lock the truth in place. Now let me ask you something. If you were Andre, would you have stayed that calm? Or would the officer's tone have pulled you into an argument? And if you were watching from that parking lot, would you have recorded or would you have looked away? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've been through something like this, share your experience so other people know they aren't alone. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the story with someone who needs to hear it, because we bring you real, grounded stories where dignity and documentation lead to accountability.
Hey, hold up. Who are you and why are you in here? Let me see your ID.
I'm here for an appointment. I have my military ID and my orders. Tell me what you
Keep
need.
your hands where I can see it.
I said I have ID and orders.
Turn around. You're being detained.
Detained for what?
Grab me. I'm not resisting. I'm trying to comply safe.
Two U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police officers thought they could treat a black man in full Navy dress blues like he was lying about who he was, put hands on him in a packed medical center lobby, and talk their way out of it afterward. What they did not expect was that the man they were pushing around was Senior Chief Andre Calloway, an active-duty Navy SEAL who stayed calm, stayed compliant, and still ended up taken down and cuffed, while strangers started recording from every angle. And before we get into how fast this spiraled, we want to tell you this clearly. We're incredibly grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now, quick question. Where are you watching from today, city, and state? And if you watch these stories because you believe accountability matters, hit like and subscribe, because this one shows exactly what happens when cameras, policy, and public pressure collide with bad policing. This happened at 6:30 a.m. inside the Savannah Area Veterans Affairs Medical Center. Early morning, low traffic, people checking in for appointments, staff starting their shift. The place ran on routine and quiet urgency. And in the middle of that, two officers turned a basic contact into a use of force scene in front of patients and employees, with phones up and body cameras, capturing more than they meant to capture. Senior Chief Calloway arrived the way disciplined people arrive. Early, prepared, he had his military ID on him. He had travel orders on him. He wore full Navy dress blues because he was moving through official stops and wasn't dressed to look casual. He wasn't loud. He wasn't looking for attention. He was focused on getting where he needed to go. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police officers in that lobby had real authority in that building. They could stop people, question them, detain them, and escalate quickly if they claimed a security reason. And in a medical setting, most people don't push back. They comply fast because they're there for care, not conflict. That's the imbalance in places like this. The uniformed officer controls the pace, and the patient usually tries to disappear from the problem. That morning, Officer Derek Walsh noticed Calloway and moved toward him first. Officer Evan Krieger stayed close behind, positioned like backup. The contact began as a standard approach. Walsh demanded identification and wanted an explanation for why Calloway was there. Calloway complied. He kept his hands visible. He didn't argue. He indicated he had identification and orders and was prepared to show them. But Walsh's tone shifted fast. It stopped sounding like verification and started sounding like accusation. He treated Calloway's calm like it was suspicious. He kept pressing even as Calloway moved to provide what was requested. Krieger watched the exchange and stayed close enough to step in if it turned physical. This is where the power game starts. An officer decides early whether he is going to accept information or try to dominate the person giving it. Walsh chose domination. He talked over Calloway's answers and acted like the proof wasn't going to matter. The lobby noticed. A receptionist looked up. A patient in the seating area stopped what they were doing. A veteran near the entrance focused in, watching the officers instead of Calloway, like he'd seen this kind of posture before. A bystander started recording from the side. Then another phone came up from farther back. That changed the math immediately. The officers weren't just controlling one person anymore. They were creating evidence in front of a room full of witnesses. Body camera audio later captured the most revealing part. While Calloway was complying and prepared to present documentation, biased remarks were made, suggesting the officers believed his uniform and identity might be fake. It wasn't careful verification. It was disbelief pointed in one direction. Then Walsh escalated physically. He moved from questioning into force. Calloway didn't strike. He didn't threaten. He didn't resist. He stayed compliant. Walsh still drove him into a takedown in the middle of the lobby and put him in handcuffs. Krieger stayed involved and close enough to stop it, but he did not intervene to prevent the takedown. At 6:30 in the morning inside a Veterans Affairs Medical Center, a black Navy SEAL in dress blues ended up on the ground in handcuffs, while multiple people recorded. The room shifted. People reacted, but most didn't feel safe stepping into it directly, not with U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police officers controlling the scene. The phones kept rolling anyway. That mattered. Calloway stayed controlled after the cuffs went on. He kept his movements minimal. He kept insisting, through measured behavior and steady compliance, that he had what they demanded from the beginning. He didn't give them a reaction they could use to justify what they already did. And Walsh, trying to hold the scene like he owned it, didn't seem to realize the story was already leaving the building through other people's cameras. The moment the supervising sergeant walked into that lobby, the whole temperature changed. Not because people suddenly felt safe, because everyone could tell this was the first person in the chain of command who understood what was happening in real time. 2 U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police officers had put a compliant man in military dress blues and handcuffs in public with multiple phones recording and body cameras running. Walsh tried to control the narrative immediately. He stayed close to Calloway and kept acting like the cuffs were routine. Krieger hovered nearby, quiet, letting Walsh do the talking, the kind of posture officers take when they want to look involved without owning decisions. The sergeant did not match their energy. He did not come in loud. He came in procedural. He looked at Calloway first, not like a suspect, but like a person who needed the situation stabilized. Then he looked at Walsh and Krieger and made them explain what legal reason they believed they had to detain him. Walsh gave the usual officer framing. He tried to make it sound like uncertainty, safety, and verification. But the scene in the lobby did not match that explanation. Calloway had not been running. He had not been yelling. He was not trying to leave. He had been doing exactly what a person does when asked for ID. The sergeant then did what should have been done before anyone put hands on him. He instructed Calloway to present his documents. Calloway produced his military ID and his travel orders. Clean, immediate, no story, no attitude, just proof. The sergeant reviewed them carefully but quickly, like someone who had looked at enough identification to know what he was seeing. He verified the information against what the officers claimed they were unsure about. The timeline, the identity, the legitimacy. It took minutes. That was the moment Walsh's position collapsed. Because once the documents were verified, the entire justification for the cuffs evaporated. There was no longer any argument for continuing the detention, and the lobby had watched the whole progression. The sergeant ordered the handcuffs removed. Walsh hesitated in that subtle way officers do when they know they went too far but still want to appear in control. The sergeant did not allow the hesitation to turn into delay. The cuffs came off. Calloway stood up calmly, adjusted his uniform, and stayed composed. No celebrating, no big reactions, just control. The people recording caught that too, and it mattered. When someone is treated like a threat and responds with discipline, it makes the force look worse, not better. The sergeant then separated the scene the way a supervisor does when he realizes a situation is now a liability. He directed Walsh and Krieger away from Calloway. He placed himself in the middle. He asked for the basics again, but this time it was about documentation, not dominance. While that was happening, the bystanders kept filming. The phones didn't go down just because the cuffs came off. Some people were speaking quietly to each other, comparing what they just saw to what they had seen before in that building. And you could tell this wasn't isolated in their minds. It fit something familiar. The sergeant recognized that, too. He didn't try to stop people from recording. He didn't posture for the cameras. He focused on containment and reporting. He contacted command staff immediately. Not later, not after the shift. Right then, while the incident was still fresh, while everyone was watching, while the officers were still on scene, and the evidence was still running. He also made it clear that all footage needed to be preserved. Body cameras, lobby cameras, any available hallway feeds, any radio traffic, and any reports tied to the incident. That decision was crucial because the first way departments protect bad behavior is by letting time and poor documentation blur the story. This time, that didn't happen. Command staff treated it like a priority because it was already becoming one. Even before news outlets touched it, the incident had the two things agencies fear: multiple angles of video from the public and audio from body cameras that would not sound good in any review. The department removed both Walsh and Krieger from duty pending review. That step did not happen quietly either, because people inside that building saw the shift in posture. They saw supervisors taking over. They saw the two officers no longer controlling the space. Calloway's chain of command was notified. That is the part a lot of civilians don't realize. When an active duty service member is involved, especially someone traveling under orders, it doesn't stay local. It becomes official and it becomes shared across systems that do not care about local excuses. The fallout started the same day. Internal Affairs opened a case. Not a casual complaint review, but a formal investigation, because there was no clean way to explain a forceful takedown and handcuffing when the person had been compliant and could prove identity within minutes. Because Calloway was military, and because the incident involved credibility issues around his identity and orders, NCIS was brought into the loop. And because this was a use of force incident with racial bias indicators and no valid basis for detention showing on its face, it drew federal civil rights attention. This is where the story stopped being about a bad morning in a lobby and became a test of whether a federal facility's police department could be held to the same standards it expected everyone else to follow. And while Walsh and Krieger tried to lean on the usual defenses, the problem was simple. The evidence was already preserved and the public already had it. Once the department locked down the footage, the case stopped being about opinions and started being about timestamps. Internal Affairs pulled the full body camera files from Walsh and Krieger, not clips, the entire recordings. They also requested the Veterans Affairs Medical Center lobby cameras, hallway feeds, and any audio tied to radio traffic. At the same time, they began collecting witness names from the lobby staff and patients who had been there at 6:30 a.m. And because Calloway was active duty traveling under orders, and the incident involved officers questioning the legitimacy of his identity, NCIS was brought in as a partner on the review. A federal civil rights investigation also opened because the detention happened in a federal facility. The force was significant compared to the situation, and the body camera audio included biased remarks that went beyond normal verification. Investigators rebuilt the incident in a straight line. They looked at what triggered the contact, what Calloway did in response, what officers claimed they saw, and what the video actually showed. They compared that against U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police detention standards and use of force policy, including what officers were required to articulate before moving to physical control. The biggest problem for Walsh and Krieger was that the decision to escalate did not match the evidence. Calloway's behavior on video showed compliance. He stayed in place. He did not attempt to flee. He did not threaten. He did not make aggressive moves. He indicated he had identification and orders and was prepared to provide them. The public videos from bystanders backed that up from different angles, and the lobby cameras confirmed the spacing, the timing, and the officers' positions. Then investigators focused on the officers' stated reason for continuing the detention. Walsh's explanation leaned on vague suspicion, as if uncertainty itself was enough. But investigators pushed it to the legal standard. What specific objective facts supported detaining Calloway in the first place? That is where the case fell apart. There was no credible safety threat, no reported crime tied to Calloway, no evidence he was trespassing, and no behavior that justified forcing him to the ground. The biased body camera remarks made it worse. The audio captured the officers treating his uniform and identity as inherently doubtful in a way that didn't line up with routine verification. It wasn't a careful check. It sounded like they were looking for a reason to disbelieve him, even while he was giving them exactly what they demanded. That mattered for two reasons. First, it helped explain why verification did not happen before force. The officers had already decided he was not legitimate. Second, it put the incident into civil rights territory, because the disbelief tracked to identity and race, not to conduct. Investigators then reviewed the force itself. They evaluated the takedown and handcuffing against the level of threat present. With no active resistance, no flight, and no safety risk visible on the footage, the force was ruled unjustified. The handcuffing was also ruled improper once it was clear the detention itself had no valid basis. Then they looked at Krieger. Krieger did not initiate the takedown, but the footage showed he was close enough to see what was happening and had the opportunity to intervene. Policy required intervention when force became excessive or unlawful. He did not step in. He stayed with Walsh and helped maintain control after the takedown instead of stopping it. That is why investigators cited Krieger for failing to intervene. The investigation also looked at what happened after the incident, because that's where officers often try to repair the story. Investigators compared written reports to the footage. They flagged contradictions in how Walsh described Calloway's behavior versus what the video showed. They also noted how quickly the narrative shifted once the supervising sergeant verified the military ID and travel orders. The sergeant's verification timeline showed that the truth was available early, and the escalation happened anyway. As the case grew, the department had to deal with two realities at the same time: internal policy violations and external scrutiny. The administrative actions came first. Both Walsh and Krieger were removed from duty during the review, then terminated once findings were finalized. Their law enforcement certifications were either revoked or suspended, depending on the specific authority involved in credentialing, because the violations went beyond a bad judgment call and into misconduct tied to unlawful detention and improper force. Supervisors were not spared either. The investigation reviewed prior complaints and prior use of force concerns tied to the same officers. It found failures in earlier oversight, including instances where warning signs should have triggered corrective action but did not. That resulted in discipline for supervisors connected to prior inaction. The department could not credibly frame this as a single bad moment if earlier patterns had been ignored. By this point, the incident was already public. Bystander video had spread, and people recognized the uniform, the setting, and the tone. The department was forced to preserve and disclose more information than it would have in a normal complaint case, because multiple agencies were watching and the public had enough footage to challenge any watered-down explanation. What started as two officers treating a man like he didn't belong ended as a formal record stating the detention had no valid basis. The force was unjustified. One officer failed to intervene, both lost their jobs, and leadership faced consequences for not acting sooner. Once the investigations ended and the terminations became official, the department tried to treat it like a closed chapter. But for Calloway, the real issue was never just the firing. It was what happened to him in a public federal facility on camera while he complied. So he filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. The case centered on a simple claim. He was detained without a valid legal basis, forced to the ground without justification, and handcuffed despite compliance, while officers made biased remarks questioning whether his uniform and identity were real. The lawsuit also targeted the department's supervision failures, because the investigation had already documented prior warning signs in inaction. The department's attorneys had one problem they could not solve with careful wording: the footage. Multiple bystander videos showed the public view. Lobby cameras showed the spacing and timing. Body camera audio captured what the officers said while they thought they were in control. And the supervising sergeant's actions created a clear reference point, because he verified Calloway's military ID and travel orders quickly and ended the detention immediately. That timeline made it hard to argue this was a reasonable mistake. As the case moved forward, Calloway's legal team did what good civil rights teams do. They made the story procedural and measurable. They focused on the decision points: why the contact started, what facts were present, what the officers did next, and what policy and law required at each step. They treated it like a checklist the officers failed. The department tried to defend the officers' choices as uncertainty and safety, but the evidence didn't support that. No valid basis for detention meant the force had no foundation. And the failure to intervene finding against Krieger narrowed the department's room to argue it was just one officer acting alone. Then the federal oversight pressure increased. When a case has clear video evidence, a formal finding of unjustified force, and civil rights implications, agencies start making decisions based on risk. A trial would have meant sworn testimony, public cross-examination, and deep discovery into training, complaint history, supervision, and past incidents. It would have pulled command staff into the spotlight, not just the two officers. That is when the settlement discussions became serious. The case ended in a multi-million settlement. The money was part of it, but the bigger impact was what the settlement forced the agency to do next. The department was pushed into stricter oversight and accountability reforms tied directly to what went wrong in that lobby. They tightened use of force review. They strengthened body camera compliance rules and consequences for missing footage or delayed uploads. They expanded training around detention standards, bias indicators, and how quickly verification becomes a pretext when an officer already made up his mind. They also increased expectations for intervention, because Krieger's failure to step in became an example of how harm happens, even when one officer is driving and the other is just going along. They also had to address supervision. It wasn't enough to punish the two officers. The findings had already shown that earlier inaction helped create the environment where they felt comfortable escalating. The reforms included stronger early warning tracking, more consistent review of complaints and force patterns, and clearer discipline when supervisors ignore repeated problems. Inside the building, the changes were visible over time. Officers became more careful about articulating reasons for stops and detentions. Supervisors became more involved early when a situation started drawing attention. Body cameras became less optional in practice because everyone understood what happens when policy and reality don't match. And staff and patients became more willing to record because they had seen proof that recording could matter. Calloway's personal outcome wasn't framed as a victory lap. He didn't need validation from strangers to know what happened. What mattered was that the official record matched the reality. The officers were removed, and the agency was forced to change practices that created the harm in the first place. That is the part people miss when they watch incidents like this. Accountability is not just a firing, it's the full chain of consequences. Evidence preserved, findings documented, careers ended, certifications affected, supervision questioned, and procedures changed. So the next person isn't left alone in the same situation. Now here's the question for you watching. If you were in that lobby, would you have recorded, spoken up, or stayed quiet because it was a federal facility with police present? And if you've ever been in a situation where you stayed calm and someone still escalated on you, what did you do afterward to protect yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story hit you, share it with someone who thinks recording and oversight don't matter. And make sure you subscribe because this channel is going to keep telling the stories where dignity holds the line and accountability actually shows up.
What's the reason you stopped us?
I'll explain.
First
ID for both of you. Why are you parked here?
We'll provide ID, but tell us what violation you're investigating.
We've had break-ins back here. That's why I'm checking.
Understood. Do you have a description from a call, or is this just a check?
Just do what I'm telling
We're
you.
asking so we can comply safely. Tell us when you
Well,
want us
what's
to
that
reach for
equipment
ID.
in there?
This isn't just about a routine traffic stop gone wrong. It's about a rookie officer, 2 undercover agents, and a moment of mistaken identity that ignited a high-stakes legal battle, forcing an entire police department to face accountability. You won't believe the immediate regret felt by the officer or the explosive aftermath that led to a major lawsuit. A brand new patrol officer thought he had finally caught 2 plainclothes criminals sitting in an unmarked sedan late at night. What he did not know was that the 2 black people inside that car were undercover internal affairs agents running an integrity operation, and every second of his high-confidence stop was getting recorded, logged, and preserved for review. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're incredibly grateful you've chosen to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. And quick question before we rewind, where are you watching from right now? What state or country? Drop it in the comments. And if you like stories where arrogance meets accountability, hit like and subscribe, because this one is a textbook example of how one bad decision turns into a lawsuit, an investigation, and footage the whole city ends up seeing. By the time the body cam caught the clearest angle, Officer Evan Mercer already had the sedan boxed in with his cruiser, spotlight burning through the rear window. He stood off to the driver's side with his chest tight, his voice loud, and his hand hovering too close to his holster. He was not treating it like a normal contact. He was treating it like he was stepping into a headline. Inside the sedan were Agent James Brooks in the driver's seat and Agent Darius Coleman in the passenger seat. They were internal affairs. They were working late, watching a separate target tied to a ghost overtime scam that had been draining the city budget for months. They were not looking for trouble, and they were not there for Evan Mercer. But Evan Mercer had not been trained to recognize the difference between suspicious and unfamiliar. He had been trained to control. James kept both hands visible. Darius kept his hands visible too. Both moved slow and deliberate, because they knew exactly how these stops went when the wrong officer decided the situation was bigger than it was. Evan started issuing commands that went beyond anything needed for a parked car contact. He demanded immediate identification, demanded an explanation for why they were there, and demanded they answer questions that had nothing to do with any traffic violation. He spoke like refusal itself was a crime. James complied with what was safe to comply with. He gave him the basics he could give without exposing an ongoing operation. Darius stayed quiet longer, watching Yvonne's hands, watching the angle of the flashlight, watching how fast the situation was moving from a question to a confrontation. Evan read their restraint as attitude. He pushed harder. He told them they were matching a description from recent break-ins. He said the vehicle was suspicious. He said the location was known for crime. But when he tried to explain what he actually saw, it was thin. A sedan parked near closed businesses. 2 people inside, engine running, lights off. Late hour. That was it. He did not have a traffic violation. He did not have a confirmed description match. He had a hunch, and he had adrenaline. James asked what law he believed they had broken. He asked it calmly, the way someone asked when they were trying to keep things from escalating. Evan did not answer with a statute or a clear reason. He answered with more commands. Darius shifted his attention to documentation. He did not announce it. He did not reach suddenly. He just made sure the body cam audio, the timestamps, and the sequence were going to matter later, because he knew a pattern when he saw one. The officer who could not explain a stop was the officer who tried to force compliance to cover the gap. Then Evan made the first choice that changed everything. He keyed his radio and described the stop like it was a high-risk situation. He told dispatch he had a suspicious vehicle potentially connected to burglaries, and he said the occupants were not cooperating. That single broadcast did two things immediately. First, it wrote a story into the system before the facts were there. The moment he labeled it high risk, every responding unit would arrive expecting danger, not a misunderstanding. Second, it locked Evan into his own narrative. Once he sold it as serious on the air, backing down would feel like losing. Dispatch asked him for details, description, indicators, the reason he believed it matched. Evan gave vague answers, then repeated the same points. Suspicious vehicle, refusal to cooperate, possible burglary suspects. James offered him a simple off-ramp. He requested a supervisor. That was a normal request. It was also the correct request, because this stop should have been cooling down, not heating up. Evan treated the supervisor requests like a challenge to his authority. His posture tightened. His voice changed. He began framing their questions as defiance. Darius watched that shift closely because that shift mattered. When officers escalated after a person asked for a supervisor or asked for the legal basis, it often looked re-James-tory on video. It looked punitive, and it was hard to justify later. Evan stepped closer to the sedan. He moved his light inside the car, sweeping the cabin like he was searching for a reason. In the center area, he noticed equipment that did not look like normal personal items. It was not a gun. It was not drugs. It was not burglary tools. But it was enough for him to decide he had been right all along. He pointed his light at a pouch, a small device, and a wire that looked like an earpiece. He demanded to know what it was. James kept her answer controlled, giving the least detail possible. He was still trying to preserve the integrity operation. He was still trying to avoid blowing cover. He was also trying to keep Evan from doing something that would force her hand. Evan escalated anyway. He told them to unlock the doors. He told them to keep their hands exactly where he wanted. He repeated his demand for IDs. James did not refuse to identify herself forever, but he could not expose sensitive credentials in the middle of a street with backup units rushing in, a target nearby and her gear visible. Darius knew that too. He also knew Evan was not entitled to an unlimited fishing expedition just because he felt nervous. Evan did not hear any of that. He heard delay. He heard caution. He heard the word no even when no one said it. Then he reached for the door handle. This was the moment that would become a problem later, because he did it without consent and without a clear safety justification that matched what he had actually observed. On camera, it looked exactly like what it was, an officer trying to take control of a situation he could not legally support. James stayed still. Darius stayed still. They did not make sudden movements. They did not argue to win the moment. They let the record build. Evan opened the door and she started ordering the driver out. His commands moved fast. He was now acting like he had probable cause, even though nothing new had happened, besides his own growing certainty. And right as he started pulling the stop into a full detention, the first set of backup lights hit the end of the block. The temperature was about to spike again, and Evan had already told everyone on the radio that he was dealing with dangerous suspects. Backup rolled in fast because Evan Mercer had already sold the stop as high risk on the radio. That mattered. When officers arrived expecting a burglary crew, they didn't come in with calm curiosity. They came in with speed, angles, and hands ready. Evan didn't correct the framing when the first unit pulled up. He didn't say it might be nothing. He didn't downgrade the call. He doubled down. He positioned himself like the lead on a felony stop, talking louder, moving sharper, acting like escalation was the same thing as control. James Brooks stayed steady in the driver's seat, hands visible. Darius Coleman stayed steady in the passenger seat, tracking the sequence like a checklist. Evan ordered both occupants out, not as a request, as a command, and he did it without building a clean legal foundation for why a parked, unmarked sedan became a detention-level event. James complied. He moved slow. He stepped out exactly the way officers are trained to want people to step out when they claim officer safety. He did not posture. He did not argue. He gave him no excuse. That should have been the end of the tension. It wasn't. Evan immediately moved into a pat-down. No clear weapon indicator, no furtive movement captured, no bulge call-out, no articulable fact beyond late night, and they won't tell me everything I'm asking. He treated his suspicion like evidence. Darius stepped out next. Same controlled movement, same compliance, same calm. Evan's backup watched the scene like they were watching suspects, because Evan's radio story had already primed them. You could see it in their spacing and their posture. Their attention wasn't on de-escalation. It was on securing bodies first, sorting facts later. And then Evan made the decision that turned a bad stop into a civil rights incident. He put James in cuffs. He called it temporary. He framed it as, until I figure out what's going on. He used the phrase, officers love when they're about to do something they can't justify later, for safety. But cuffs are not a casual pause button. Cuffs are a level of force and a level of detention that demands a real legal basis. Evan didn't have it. James stayed composed because he knew exactly what this would look like on camera. He requested a supervisor again. He asked for the reason for cuffs. He did not shout. He did not fight. He did not give him an excuse to reframe her as resisting. Evan responded by tightening the scene, not loosening it. He cuffed Darius next. Now he had two calm, compliant people in handcuffs, with no contraband, no weapon discovery, no traffic offense, and no clear probable cause. And the longer that took, the worse it got for him. Once they were cuffed, Evan did what officers often do when they feel the stop slipping. He went searching for something to justify what he already did. He moved back to the sedan. One of the backup officers stood near the open door while Evan started looking inside. Not a quick glance for safety, not a protective sweep based on a specific threat. He was probing. He handled items. He shifted a pouch. He looked for identifiers. He shined light on equipment and treated unfamiliar like illegal. That was another problem. You don't get to search a car just because you're uncomfortable. And you don't get to handle someone's gear because you want to find a reason after the fact. Darius watched closely. He didn't need to say much. The video would say it for him. Evan kept asking questions that weren't required for the stop, and when he didn't get the answers he wanted, his tone turned more punitive. The shift was subtle but clear. This wasn't, what's going on here? It was, you're going to cooperate because I said so. And then came the mask off moment. The one line that later made the whole stop look worse, not better. Evan made it clear that their refusal to answer extra questions was the reason he was treating them like criminals. Not a crime, not evidence. Their boundaries. That's when it stopped being a misunderstanding and started looking like regimentation for not submitting. One of the backup officers, newer too, asked Evan quietly what the original violation was. Evan gave a weak answer again. Suspicious vehicle. Recent burglaries. They matched the vibe. They wouldn't explain themselves. That quiet question mattered because it showed even backup couldn't see the legal foundation. Dispatch came back over the air with no confirmation of any description match tied to the sedan. Nothing connected the plate to a burglary alert. Nothing came back that justified cuffs. Evan ignored that off-ramp too. James asked again for a supervisor. Darius asked for a supervisor. They did it calmly and they did it repeatedly because they were giving the department a chance to correct the error before it turned into a full disaster. Evan finally requested a supervisor, but not as an "I need guidance." He did it like he needed someone to validate him. And while they waited, Evan tried to control the narrative. He told the backup officers that the subjects were being difficult. He made it sound like they had done something to earn the cuffs. He repeated the implication that they were connected to burglaries, even though he had nothing concrete. Meanwhile, James and Darius stayed exactly where they were placed, standing cuffed at the front of the cruiser, compliant and silent, except for the necessary requests. Supervisor, legal basis, and preserving their safety. This is the part people misunderstand when they watch stops like this. Cam doesn't mean powerless. Cam is strategy. Cam is how you don't give someone a reason to escalate further. Calm is how you let the evidence speak. A few minutes later, the shift supervisor's unit turned into the lot. Sergeant Edward Delaney stepped out, walked into the scene, and immediately saw the problem. 2 people cuffed. No visible contraband. No active threat. No urgent crime scene. Just a rookie officer running hot and trying to justify it in real time. Delaney asked Evan for the reason, the exact articulable facts. Evan started explaining with the same vague points. The time of night, the area, recent break-ins, the parked sedan, the refusal to answer. Delaney didn't argue with him in front of everyone, but he didn't look convinced either. He asked for IDs. James and Darius stayed careful. They did not want to blow an ongoing operation in the open, so Delaney tried the next step. He called it in. He asked dispatch for more detail. He asked if any unit had a confirmed suspect description that actually matched these people or this car. And while Delaney worked through the basics, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, stepped away slightly, and answered. That call changed his face immediately. Because it wasn't patrol. It wasn't a captain. It wasn't the watch commander. It was internal affairs leadership. And the message was simple. Those 2 people were theirs. The stop was interfering with an active operation, and Delaney needed to end it immediately. Delaney turned back toward the scene. Evan saw the shift in his posture before Delaney said anything. You could see it on the body cam angle. Evan's confidence draining out, replaced by the sudden realization that the worst possible people had just been unlawfully detained by the newest officer on the shift. And right there, before the cuffs even came off, Evan started changing his tone. Sergeant Edward Delaney came back from the phone call with a different face and a different urgency. He didn't need time to think. He didn't need to hear both sides. He already had the only fact that mattered. The 2 people in cuffs were internal affairs, and the stop had already crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Delaney immediately took control of the scene the way supervisors do when they're trying to stop a situation from getting worse. He directed Evan Mercer to step back. He told the backup officers to relax their posture and stop treating the detainees like active threats. Then he moved to James Brooks and Darius Coleman, confirmed their identity in a way that didn't involve flashing credentials to the whole parking lot, and told them he was ending the detention. Evan's body language changed on camera before the cuffs even came off. The command voice dropped. The posture softened. He started talking fast, trying to explain instead of control. But the record was already built. Delaney ordered the cuffs removed. James and Darius didn't celebrate. They didn't taunt. They stayed calm because calm is what keeps the focus on the facts. They asked for the names and badge numbers of everyone on scene. Delaney understood why they asked and didn't fight it. Evan tried to justify the stop one more time, leaning on vague points again. Time of night area, recent bulletin, occupants being evasive. Delaney pressed him for the specific, articulable facts that supported cuffs and a vehicle search. Evan didn't have anything new to offer. He had feelings and assumptions, and he had already acted on them. Then came the moment that ended any chance of this being handled quietly. Evan tried to reframe what happened. He suggested to Delaney that they could write it up differently. He floated the idea of calling it a welfare check, or a suspicious vehicle contact, or anything that would make the cuffs and search look like a normal precaution instead of an unlawful detention. That was the second scandal, because it wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was an attempt to rewrite the mistake after the fact. And the problem for Evan was simple. Bodycam audio doesn't care what someone wishes happened. Dispatch logs don't change because someone got embarrassed. The radio call he made, the way he described the situation, the way backup responded, the moment the door opened, the handcuffs, the search behavior, the tone shifts, everything had timestamps. Delaney didn't agree to Evan's reframe. He shut it down and told him to write exactly what he did and why he did it. He also told him, in front of witnesses, to stop talking and stop making it worse. James and Darius did one more thing before leaving. They told Delaney, procedurally, that the department needed to preserve all recordings tied to the incident. That included Evan's body cam, any backup body cams, the cruiser dash video, and every radio transmission. That mattered because the first move in many cases like this is accidental gaps, late uploads, missing clips, dead batteries. James and Darius didn't leave that door open. They left the scene and immediately informed their chain of command that the operation had been compromised and that they had just become plaintiffs in a civil rights incident. And Evan stood there with the quiet kind of panic that doesn't look dramatic but feels like a floor falling out from under someone. He had spent the whole stop trying to prove he belonged. Now he was going to be used as an example of what happens when a rookie plays high-risk cop without the legal ground to stand on. The department couldn't bury it, not with internal affairs directly involved and the evidence already locked in multiple systems. By the next day, Delaney had submitted a supervisor memo outlining what happened and why he ended it. IA opened an internal investigation immediately, not just into Evan's stop, but into the bigger issue it exposed. How often officers were allowed to escalate based on vibes and radio storytelling instead of facts. Evan was interviewed quickly. His report didn't match the video in key ways. He described more threat than the camera showed. He described more resistance than the audio captured. He described the equipment like it was suspicious tools, but he still couldn't articulate a crime. That mismatch became the center of the internal case. Within the week, James and Darius retained counsel. The notice was straightforward and clean because it didn't need to be complicated. They alleged unlawful detention, false arrest, unreasonable search, regemestion, policy violations, and municipal liability. And then the public side caught up. The story first spread inside the department, then outside it. People talk. Someone heard that a rookie had cuffed IA. Then someone filed records requests. Then a local reporter asked about the incident. The department tried to slow it down with ongoing investigation language, but the existence of footage was already known, and the pressure built. When the Bodycam video finally released, it didn't need narration to look bad. It showed a stop that started with weak reasoning and turned into force because the officer wanted control more than clarity. It showed a radio call that exaggerated the threat level. It showed a search that looked like justification hunting. It showed cuffs applied to calm, compliant people. It showed multiple off-ramps ignored. And it showed the moment Evan tried to change the story after learning who they were. That last part mattered to the public more than anything else because mistakes can be corrected, but backpedaling on camera looks like intent. The city's legal department saw it the same way. They didn't want a jury hearing that audio. The lawsuit didn't need dramatic courtroom scenes. It needed receipts. In deposition, Evan was walked through the stop step by step. Every claim he made was compared to the video and the dispatch log. He was asked to explain his actions. Then the policy manual came out. Not the vague, be professional sections. The parts about articulation, detention limits, use of handcuffs, searching vehicles, calling a supervisor, and truthful radio traffic. Those policy excerpts were used like a measuring tape. The camera showed what happened. The policy showed what should have happened. The distance between those two was the case. The department moved fast because they had to. Evan was taken off the street during the investigation. Depending on how the department handled it formally, he either resigned before termination or was terminated after a disciplinary process. Either way, the outcome was clear. He wasn't staying in a uniform. Delaney didn't walk away untouched. Supervisors don't get to pretend they didn't see what happened once it's on record. He was cited for supervisory failures and how the stop was allowed to escalate before he arrived, and for not shutting it down sooner once the warning signs were obvious. His discipline wasn't the same as Evans, but it was enough to signal the department wasn't calling this just a misunderstanding. The city settled the lawsuit. Cities do that when the video is strong, when the policy violations are easy to explain, and when the cost of trial is higher than the cost of change, and change was part of it. The department updated training and field supervision rules. Internal Affairs used the incident as a case study because it showed exactly how small decisions become big violations. Weak stop, louder commands, a radio narrative, a search for justification, cuffs as a control tool, and then an attempt to rewrite history when reality hits. This wasn't a story about a single bad stop. It was a story about a mindset. A rookie wanted to prove himself, and he treated fear like evidence and paid for it. Now let me ask you, if you were in that car and you stayed calm while an officer escalated without a legal basis, would you have known what to request and what not to do? And if you were the supervisor arriving, would you have shut it down immediately or tried to protect the rookie and smooth it over? Drop your thoughts in the comments and share this with someone who thinks small choices on a stop don't matter. And if you want more realistic stories where power gets checked by evidence and accountability, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Hey, let me see your ID. What are you doing right here?
What's this about?
Do what I said. Give me ID.
Listen, I'm not arguing. What is the reason?
This area's got drug issues. Where you going? Who you meeting?
I'm not giving personal details. What's the legal basis for ID?
Stop resisting.
A patrol officer decided a black man standing near the curb outside a crowded train station had to be involved in drugs. He walked up and demanded identification right away, without explaining a legal reason. The man didn't argue or raise his voice. He just asked what this was about and whether he was being detained. The officer didn't answer that clearly. Instead, he started acting like the questions themselves were a problem, and he kept tightening the situation until it turned into a public detention with phones recording from a few feet away. And before the story goes further, thanks for spending your time here today. Tell everyone where you're watching from in the comments, your state or your country. And if you watch stories about accountability, body cameras, and people staying calm while someone tries to push them around, hit like and subscribe. Now here's how it started. It was midday outside a commuter station that stayed busy all day. People were coming out of the doors in waves. Cars pulled up to the curb and left. Buses stopped, opened, closed. It was loud and fast, the kind of place where nobody expects an incident until one starts happening right in front of them. Andre Lewis was standing near the curb because he had an assignment. He was a federal agent on an active surveillance operation. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't approaching strangers. He wasn't doing anything dramatic. He was positioned where he could see what he needed to see without drawing attention. He kept his phone low and checked it like any other commuter. Officer Tyson Mercer saw Andre and made an assumption. Mercer didn't walk up like he was checking on someone's welfare. He walked up like he had already decided what Andre was. He moved into Andre's space and demanded ID immediately. Andre stayed calm. He didn't give long explanations. He didn't volunteer details. He kept it short on purpose because he was trying to protect an ongoing operation. He asked basic questions about why Mercer needed ID and whether he was free to leave. Mercer didn't like that. Instead of stating a clear reason for the stop, Mercer began trying to pull information out of Andre piece by piece. He pressed for where Andre was going, who he was meeting, and why he was standing there. Andre kept it minimal. He didn't get sarcastic. He didn't raise his hands in the air. He didn't posture. He just didn't play along. That's when Mercer changed how he described Andre's behavior. Mercer started treating short answers as suspicious. He acted like Andre was being difficult, even though Andre was standing still and speaking normally. Mercer's tone got sharper. He stepped closer and began giving more commands. People around them started noticing because Mercer was turning it into a scene. Commuters slowed down. A few stopped and watched. Some moved around them to avoid getting close. One bystander, Maya Rios, took out her phone and started recording. She didn't run up. She didn't scream. She just held the camera steady and kept both of them in frame. At the same time, Mercer's body camera was running. Mercer then moved toward a frisk. He justified it as a safety step, even though nothing about Andre's behavior had changed. Andre didn't swing, he didn't jerk away, he didn't try to run. He stayed controlled and asked what Mercer thought he was doing and what the reason was. Mercer took those questions as a challenge. He started talking like Andre was refusing commands, even though Andre was staying in place. Mercer put hands on Andre to control his position. He told him to stop moving and stop resisting, even though the video would later show Andre wasn't fighting. Mercer acted like he needed to gain control of someone who was already calm. The public part got worse fast. More people stopped. More phones came up. The curb lane backed up slightly because drivers slowed down to look. Mercer escalated again and went to handcuffs. He pulled Andre's hands behind him in full view of the station entrance, the sidewalk traffic, and the phone's recording from close range. Andre had been trying not to reveal who he was. He didn't want to flash credentials. He didn't want to compromise the surveillance. He didn't want attention on that spot. But at that point, the attention was already there. The detention had already disrupted the operation, and Mercer was already committed to making it look like Andre was the problem. Andre stayed steady, but he made a decision right then. If Mercer was going to keep going, Andre was going to force a supervisor response. Andre stayed calm in the cuffs, but he stopped playing the regular stop game. The detention had already pulled attention to the exact area he was working, and Mercer was still acting like he could keep tightening the situation until something stuck. Andre did two things in order, and both were deliberate. First, he made it clear he was not going to physically fight Mercer. No sudden movements, no arguing, no attempts to yank away. He kept his body still because he knew what officers sometimes write later when a stop looks bad on video. He wasn't giving Mercer anything to twist. Second, he forced the stop out of Mercer's control and into supervision. Andre told Mercer he was a federal agent and that Mercer needed a supervisor immediately. Mercer didn't accept that at face value. He treated it like another story. He kept Andre in cuffs and tried to keep the situation on the sidewalk instead of letting it become a supervisor scene. He pushed for details right there, in public, like he could make Andre prove it without changing his own posture. Andre didn't start explaining the operation. He didn't start naming people. He didn't start giving out sensitive info in front of commuters holding phones. He repeated the request. Supervisor now. Verify credentials properly. That's when Mercer made another mistake. He tried to talk over Andre and control the narrative for the crowd. The body cam captured Mercer using resistance language again, acting like Andre's calm questions and requests for a supervisor were a refusal to comply. Meanwhile, Maya kept recording. She didn't stop when the cuffs went on. She adjusted her position slightly to keep the frame clear. She captured Mercer's stance, Andre's posture, the cuffs, the surrounding people, and the fact that Andre wasn't pulling away or fighting. And you could see it in the crowd. The mood changed. At first, people assumed the officer must have a reason. But when they watch someone stay calm and still get cuffed while asking basic questions, the assumptions start cracking. A few bystanders started speaking up, not yelling, but asking what Andre had done. Others just recorded. Mercer called it in. That radio call mattered because it locked in Mercer's story early. Once an officer says, certain things over the radio, it's harder to walk them back later without someone asking why the language didn't match the video. Within minutes, Sergeant Daniel Hart arrived. Hart didn't come in with the same energy as Mercer. He came in with the look of someone who knew this could go bad for the department fast. He took in the scene before speaking, cuffs on, multiple phones out, Mercer talking like he was defending his actions, Andre standing still. Hart separated the conversation. That was the first sign he wasn't going to let Mercer keep running it. Hart spoke to Mercer briefly, then turned to Andre. Andre didn't perform. He didn't try to embarrass Mercer for the crowd. He kept it professional and kept it short. He identified himself again and presented credentials in a controlled way, not flashing them around for every phone camera. Hart didn't just glance and nod. He did what supervisors are supposed to do when something is sensitive and potentially high liability. He verified. He checked credentials properly and made the confirmation call. That verification flipped the entire situation in real time. Hart's posture changed. Mercer's posture changed. The air around them changed. Because now this wasn't an officer investigating suspicious activity. Now it was a patrol officer who had detained a federal agent without a clear reason, on camera in public, while the agent stayed calm the whole time. Hart ordered the cuffs removed, and that moment was caught on everything: Bodycam, Maya's phone, and at least a few other bystanders. The same hands that put the cuffs on had to take them off. The same officer who acted certain had to stand there while his supervisor corrected him in front of a crowd. Andre didn't celebrate. He didn't throw it in Mercer's face. He adjusted his wrists, took a breath, and immediately checked his surroundings because the surveillance assignment was already disrupted. He was thinking about what damage was done and what had to be reported. Hart kept it controlled. He didn't yell at Mercer on the sidewalk. He didn't create a bigger scene than necessary, but he also didn't treat it like nothing happened. He watched the recordings being made. He knew the department couldn't pretend this was a normal stop. Mercer tried to explain himself. He referenced suspicious behavior and implied he had concerns before he demanded ID. But the problem was simple. The cameras showed the order of events. Mercer demanded ID first and tried to justify it afterward. The crowd heard it. The phones captured it. The body cam captured it. Hart ended the street portion quickly. He instructed Mercer to disengage. He spoke to Andre in a lower, more controlled way, confirming that Andre was free to leave and that the department would document the interaction properly. Andre left the immediate area not because he was satisfied, but because he had to deal with the operational fallout. His assignment was compromised. His presence was now known, and the station area had just been turned into a public incident. By the end of that day, there were already two versions of the story forming. One version was what Mercer would later write: a suspicious person, evasive answers, officer safety, resistance, and a detention that made sense. The other version was what the cameras captured: an officer making an assumption, demanding ID without a clear reason, escalating when he didn't get the answers he wanted, and using forced language while the person stayed calm. And the difference between those versions was going to matter, because this wasn't just a complaint anymore. This was a documented timeline with multiple recordings and a supervisor on scene who verified exactly who had been detained. By the next morning, this wasn't just a bad stop. It was a file with a timeline. Maya's video showed the start clearly. Mercer walked up and demanded ID right away. No clear reason given first, no report of a crime in progress, no matching description, just a demand. Then pressure when Andre didn't feed him details. Mercer's body cam filled in everything Maya's angle didn't catch. The exact order of Mercer's questions, how Andre answered, how quickly Mercer moved from talk to hands-on, and how often Mercer used the word resisting while Andre stayed controlled. Then other bystander clips surfaced, different angles, same story. That's what made it hard to spin. One video can be argued. 3 or 4 videos from different distances and angles becomes a timeline. And then Mercer wrote his report. The report read like a stop that made sense from the beginning. It claimed Mercer noticed suspicious behavior first, that Andre gave evasive answers, that Mercer feared for safety, and that Andre's behavior forced escalation. It described the handcuffs like they were the obvious outcome of Andre's conduct. But video doesn't care about a narrative. Video shows order, video shows tone, video shows who escalated first. Within days, the department had 2 things on their desk. 1, a clean sequence on camera, and 2, a written report that didn't match it. That's what triggered Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs didn't need to guess what happened. They laid out the footage in a timeline and matched it to Mercer's stated reasons. Every time Mercer claimed something happened before, they checked whether it actually happened before. Every time Mercer wrote, "subject resisted," they looked for resistance. They also pulled dispatch and radio traffic. Mercer's wording over the radio got reviewed the same way because those early statements are what officers rely on later when they say, "This is what I believed at the time." Then, the department made the move that happens when they see risk bigger than one incident. They sent it to an outside civil rights review as well. That outside review focused on 2 questions. Was there reasonable suspicion at the start, or did Mercer create justification after he'd already decided Andre was a problem? Was this a one-off or part of a pattern? That second question is how Mercer's past caught up to him. They audited Mercer's prior stops, not just whether he made arrests. They looked at how often he demanded ID, how often he escalated to frisk, how often he used certain language, how often his reasons were vague, and whether his stop data showed a pattern in who he approached and how those encounters ended. The station stop became the example case because it was clean on video. And once you have one example on video, it becomes easier to recheck older stops that were previously just paperwork. Meanwhile, Andre wasn't just dealing with embarrassment. His surveillance assignment had been disrupted in public. A uniformed officer put him in cuffs in the exact area he was working. People recorded his face. The crowd's attention moved right to the location. Whatever low-profile advantage his team had was gone. Andre's agency documented that operational impact. The city's attorneys saw it immediately because it wasn't just hurt feelings. It was measurable disruption caused by an unjustified detention. The settlement talks moved fast for a reason. The evidence didn't leave room for a clean defense. The case ended with a $3 million settlement. Mercer was terminated. And the department had to do something public-facing that looked like more than a sacrifice of one officer. They had to show structural change because the recordings made it impossible to pretend this was just a misunderstanding. So the policy changes followed the same pressure points the videos exposed. Reasonable suspicion documentation tightened. Officers had to clearly state the reason for a stop before escalating. And supervisors had to review stops that moved quickly to frisk or cuffs. Stop data audits expanded. The department increased monitoring for patterns. Who was being stopped, why, and what outcomes followed. Stops with vague justifications triggered extra review. Bodycam compliance got stricter. Not just turn it on, but your report has to match what the camera shows, with consequences when it didn't. Inside the department, people understood the real lesson. Mercer didn't get in trouble because the public got loud. He got in trouble because cameras made the timeline undeniable, and his paperwork didn't match. Andre went back to work, but the incident followed him in a different way, not as a viral victory moment, as proof that calm behavior doesn't always stop escalation, but documentation can stop the cover story afterward. And Maya's role mattered more than she probably expected at the start. She didn't argue with Mercer. She didn't do anything risky. She simply recorded steadily from the beginning and kept the moment intact. That's why the timeline held. So here's the question for you. If you saw a stop like this in real life, calm person, no clear reason given, quick escalation, what would you do? Walk past, record, speak up. Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, realistic modern situations where the truth is in the details and accountability actually lands, make sure you like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.